Chapter 6. Shortly after sunrise, they were back in their observation post of the previous night, watching the roamers camp. For some hours, nothing out of the ordinary seemed to occur. The roamers went about mundane day-to-day tasks, like lighting fires, preparing breakfast, cleaning and mending items of equipment and clothing. Then, around mid-morning, Jerome, the heavy-set man from the night before, emerged from one of the caravans. He was dressed in a brightly patterned shirt that came down below his hips and had wide, voluminous sleeves, gathered by a leather cuff at each wrist. A heavy leather belt was round his waist, and Will could see the hilt of a long knife in a scabbard worn on his left-hand side. He wore black trousers and knee-high brown leather boots. Of more immediate interest to Will, he carried a large canvas sack in his hand. As he climbed down the steps from his caravan, two of the camp dogs ran low-bellied towards him and tried to sniff at it. He cursed at them, and they slunk away. "What do you suppose is in the sack?" Will asked quietly. Alice, lying beside him, wrapped in her brown cloak, glanced at him. "From the interest those dogs showed, I'd say it's meat." "My guess too," Will said. He had also noticed the brown stains on the sack, dried blood in all probability. Jerome walked towards the far side of the camp, then turned and called to the caravans. "Petalengo, where the blazes are you, boy?" "Coming, Jerome," called a high-pitched voice. The door of one of the caravans slammed open, and a young boy, no more than 12 or 13 by the look of him, hurried down the set of steps, tucking his shirt in as he went. He was olive-skinned and had long dark hair, held back from his face by a yellow headband. "Next time, be ready when I tell you," Jerome said. He was obviously not the forgiving type. "Now, keep watch behind me," he ordered, and strode towards the trees on the far side of the clearing. The boy had to half run to keep up with Jerome's long strides, and he stayed a few paces behind him. "Wait here and keep an eye on things," Will said. "I'm going to see where friend Jerome is off to." It was easier said than done. He had to skirt in a wide arc to stay clear of the campsite, then move along the road to the edge of the far tree line. Despite losing time doing so, once he entered the trees, he was confident he'd pick up Jerome's trail soon enough. He was mistaken. He found the boy's trail easily enough, but Petalengo hadn't stayed with his older companion. He was following some distance behind him, obliterating the tracks Jerome made as he twisted and turned his way through the forest. Jerome zigzagged so much that there was no way of establishing his base course, and there was a distinct chance that Will would be spotted by Petulengo. The boy was dangerously alert too. Several times, when Will made a slight noise, and it was impossible to move in total silence, the dark head would snap up and around, and Will would have to freeze in place, concealed from view by his cloak and his own ability to stand stock still. Petalengo stayed so far behind Jerome that Will never sighted the burly roamer. He had to be content to shadow the boy. After a short while, he realized how effective the roamer's system was. The boy obviously knew where Jerome was heading, so he could stay a long way behind him and effectively frustrate any stranger who might be trying to track him, as Will was doing. After 10 minutes, Will had to admit defeat. He simply couldn't take the risk that he might be spotted. It might cost Ebony her life. Seething with frustration, he made his roundabout way back to the spot where Alice was watching the camp. She saw by the look on his face that he had had no luck. She pointed to the campsite. "I think I might have found our way in," she said. Will followed her pointing finger and saw a figure he hadn't noticed before. It was an old woman dressed in filthy rags, her hair long and grey and unkempt. She moved round the camp, bent almost double, collecting firewood from the central wood stack and distributing it to the individual cooking fires as ready fuel. With that task done, she filled a bucket from a large water barrel attached to one of the caravans and proceeded to distribute that as well. It became obvious that she was nothing more than a drudge, a beast of burden in the camp. If any of the roamers came close to her, they ignored her at best, or spat a curse at her as they passed. One of the men cuffed her around the back of the head. She shied away from him, dropping her bucket and spilling the water. Her shrill cry of protest was met by uncaring laughter from the man. As she stooped to retrieve her bucket, she kicked it, sending it rolling away from her. She scuttled after it, one hand instinctively raised to ward off another blow, snivelling and whining. At the same time, a door in one of the caravans banged open, and a Roma woman, at least 20 years younger than the grey-haired woman, shouted at her. "Hild! Get that water in here at once! What are you doing, you layabout?" Hild whined something unintelligible, and the man who had caused her to spill the water snarled at her as well. She hobbled back to the rain barrel to refill her bucket, pursued by the Roma woman's sharp insults and orders. In the Roma camp, Hild was the lowest of the low. Will frowned at Alice. "I don't see how that will help us." She smiled back at him. "While you were gone, I heard one of the roamers telling her to get more firewood. We wait till she leaves the camp. Then we follow her, and I take her place." "You have to be joking," Will said. He looked from the bent figure of the crone, now hobbling back to the caravan with a full water bucket, to Alice, slim and beautiful and young. "You don't think they might notice a slight difference in her appearance?" "I don't think they notice her at all," Alice said seriously. "They don't see her as a person, just as a piece of equipment or something to kick or cuff or curse when they're in the mood. Don't forget, I've been trained to disguise myself when necessary. If I put ash and dirt through my hair and hobble around like her, I doubt they'll see the difference, particularly if I swap clothes with her." She shuddered slightly. "That's the one part I'm not looking forward to." Will studied the hobbling, mumbling figure again. "You really think you can pass yourself off as her?" Alice nodded. "If she were one of them, I'd never get away with it. But they take no notice of her. And people see what they expect to see. You've told me that often enough." He was silent for a few seconds, and she pressed home her argument. "This way I'll be inside their camp. I'll be able to listen to their conversations, and, with any luck, I'll find out where they're keeping Ebony. Or if Jerome and the boy go off into the forest, I'll follow them. Odds are they won't take any notice of Hild collecting firewood. And you can follow me at a distance. That way you can stay well back out of sight until we find where they've got Ebony hidden." "I'm not sure," Will said. "It might work, but it's a big chance." "I'm willing to take it. What can they do to me? After all, you'll be watching here in the forest if I'm found out. And honestly, I think it's our only chance to find Ebony." "Let me think," Will said. He knew that if he were in Alice's place, he wouldn't hesitate to put the plan into operation. But he'd be risking Alice as well as Ebony, and he simply couldn't make that decision. "Better think fast," Alice said. "She's leaving the camp." He looked up. Hild was trudging towards the forest, a small axe in her hand and a large wicker wood carrier slung over her shoulder. She was heading for a point 50 meters to the north of where they lay concealed. "All right," he said, coming to a decision. "Let's do it." It was easy to find Hild. The sound of the small axe rang through the forest as she cut pieces of deadfall into manageable lengths. Will and Alice ghosted through the trees as she slowly moved further and further away from the encampment. When they felt they were a safe distance away, Will stepped quietly from the trees in front of her. To Hild, it seemed that the young man in the green and grey cloak had suddenly materialized out of thin air. She gasped in fright and staggered back, one hand raised in front of her face. Will recognized the gesture. It was one that older people used to ward off what they called the evil eye from strangers. He also noted that, although she had the axe in her other hand, She made no movement to defend herself with it, nor to threaten him. Hild's instincts for self-protection seemed to have been dulled by her time with the roamers. "Relax, Hild," he said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you."
"Who are you? How do you know my name? I've done nothing wrong," she babbled,
still averting her gaze from his. He looked to Alice, standing concealed in the trees, and made a gesture. "Help needed here." Alice moved into sight now, and Hild backed away as she saw her. "It's all right, Hild," Alice said in a soothing voice. "We're not going to hurt you. We're here to help you." Perhaps the sight of another woman gave Hild greater confidence. Slowly, she lowered the arm she had thrown up to shield her face. She leaned forward to peer more closely at Alice. Alice smiled encouragingly at her. It had often been said that Alice's smile was a sight worth seeing, and it seemed to have a calming effect on the old woman.
"Who are you?"
Hild asked. "My name is Alice, and this is my friend Will," she said, indicating the young ranger. Hild glanced at him, all the suspicion and fear returning to her face as she did so. Alice continued quickly. "Tell us, Hild, why are the roamers so cruel to you?" It was the right approach to take, Will realized. It immediately placed Alice on Hild's side. The old woman sniffed, wiping her nose with the ragged end of her sleeve.
"Cruel? Aye, that they are. Beat me they do, and curse me and kick me. And I try to do my best for them, but I'm old now. I can't move as fast as I used to. I try, but I'm too slow and they beat me."
"But aren't you one of them?" Alice asked. She took the old woman's hand gently in her own, and Hild looked up at her through teary eyes whose colour seemed washed away by age.
"One of them? No, I'm Gallican. Least I was. When my man died, the village had no further use for me. Wanted the farm, you see. They threw me out with nothing, left me to die. The roamers took me in. I was grateful at first, but after a while I wished they hadn't. Might have been easier to die. Been with them now for—" She paused, and a vague look came into her eyes. "I don't know how long." "Why do you stay with them?" Will asked, and she looked at him. By now she seemed to have accepted that if he was a friend of Alice's, she had nothing to fear from him. "Where else could I go?" she said. "Nobody wants an old woman. It was stay with the roamers or starve."
She laughed suddenly, a harsh cackle that had no humour in it.
"Not that they feed me well. It's scraps for me. Anything that's not good enough for the dogs."
Alice and Will exchanged a quick glance. "The dogs?" Alice said. "The dogs in the camp?"
"Aye, those too. And the—"
She stopped, a fearful gleam in her eyes.
"Yes, the dogs in the camp,"
she amended quickly. With an enormous effort, Will prevented himself from looking at Alice again. He looked away casually, as if he hadn't noticed Hild's stumble. "Why don't you run away?" Alice asked. Hild looked at her as if the question was insane.
"How? Where would I go? I've got nothing. If I tried to run away, they'd come after me and drag me back. Old woman like me can't run fast. Nothing I can do. I'm stuck with the roamers, and I'll have to make the best of it."
Her voice was heavy with the inevitability of her predicament. "Hild," Alice said slowly, "if you could get away from the roamers, would you want to?"
"Well, of course,"
Hild replied eagerly. Then reality claimed her once more.
"But how? I can't run. And what would I do if I get away? No, it's foolishness to even think of that."
"We'd help you," Will said, and she looked at him suspiciously.
"Why would you do that?"
"Let's just say we have a score to settle with these roamers," Will told her. She wavered. The idea of escaping her current life was an attractive one.
"But what would I do?" she asked.
Alice answered this time. "We have a friend who owns a restaurant. I'm sure you could work for her. It'll be a lot easier than what you are doing, and nobody would kick you or curse you. But you'd have to work, Will warned her, and she turned her gaze to him.
I'm not afraid of work, she said. I don't expect handouts. But pay me a little. Let me have a little to eat and give me somewhere warm to sleep. That'd be like heaven.
I'm sure Jenny would give you plenty to eat, Will said, and she's an excellent cook. We'll give you some money for now, Alice said, and Will can take you to another village to wait for us. We have horses, so he'll take you far enough to be safe from the roamers. Hild wavered still.
You're sure this friend of yours will give me a job?
Alice nodded emphatically. If we ask her, yes. It'll be light work and you'll have a good life, Hild. And, to seal the bargain, you can have this fine dress of mine. Hild's eyes opened wide at her words. The dress was a simple enough one, but it was made of good quality wool, soft and warm to the touch. And it was unpatched and clean and in infinitely better shape than the rags she was wearing.
But what will you wear? She asked.
Alice gestured to Hild's ragged skirt, blouse and shawl. I'll trade for your clothes. Hild frowned, puzzled by the idea.
Why would you want to wear these?
Alice allowed herself the ghost of a smile. Believe me, I don't want to, but it's sort of necessary for what we have in mind.